Well, we are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Nathan Grifffith is with us, a professor at Belmont, among other things, European politics, kind of talking the royal family now. There's been some time that's passed. Of course, King Charles now in place. I guess they have to reprint all the money, huh?
That's what I hear. Or at least they're going to. I don't know if they have to or not, but they're going to.
But they're going to reprint it and put his image on that and some of the coins. I've seen some of that in the news stories. And yeah, we were talking about just the financing and the like. And you're right, the Queen and King Charles have paid taxes. They've chosen to, I think, voluntarily, more or less. But they talk about a sovereign grant that is in place, that is money from, I guess, the British government to help them in their official capacity. It's what they do. They live a very public life. And that's where sometimes the controversies come over times. And I think maybe the Queen always being aware of public image, saying, you know, people are maybe saying, gosh, there's folks starving in this country, and yet the royals are living, you know, the high life with this money, and what do they really bring to the table, which we'll talk more on. But she pays taxes. I mean, that was some of the discussion. Maybe at some point, you know, how much money and what do they bring to the table? Do we continue? I can't imagine Britain without a royal family.
And I think, at least currently, it would be hard for Britain to imagine that.
Yeah.
There are people who've proposed it from time to time and thought about it. But I mean, if you think about even you think about the scenes of Queen Elizabeth's funeral, and having Charles and William's children, the family, walking, showing, helping lead the country through a time of mourning. Or you think about the openings of the Olympic Games, or where you see William and his kids at football matches for the World Cup or the European, you know, well, they haven't had the World Cup lately, but it's coming up in November, but the European Cup games, etc., where they are there to sort of channel, to represent, to be the avatar, as it were, of the country. And so that's, you know, when they're doing these things on behalf of this figurehead of the state to represent the United Kingdom to the outside world. That's why they get sent to other places to meet with people, to do things, why they host people when they come to Great Britain. And essentially the sovereign grant that they get is simply there to, as any employer would pay any employee's expenses for doing their job.
Right.
You know, to travel, for example, to pay for their expenses. Of course, so that...
And typically when they travel too, I always wonder what they talk about. They're always at Wimbledon, some of the royals, and I always wonder what they're saying when they lean in and whisper. But when they travel, I mean, you know, when the Prime Minister's traveling and meeting with royal leaders, I mean, meeting with other world leaders, you know, they're talking politics, or they're talking, you know, whatever type of issues are between the two countries. When the royals travel and they draw a huge crowd, if they were to come here, and of course we can go back to Princess Diana and all of that. When they meet, are they typically meeting with other world leaders? Do they obviously do a lot of charitable things as well? What are they talking about? When they go, I mean, they're there to support. You know, do they have any special background in certain issues that they deal with? And I guess they're not getting into the political realm.
No, not usually, but I guess the best way to think about them in that context is brand ambassador.
Okay. They're a brand ambassador, like PR for the country. They're
a way of saying, you know, we cared enough to send our head of state, or you know, the Prince of Wales, or the next person in line. So they're representing the United Kingdom and showing that the United Kingdom's interested. And a lot of the places where they do travel are members of the Commonwealth. So after the British Empire fell apart, they created the Commonwealth of nations that are former members of the empire, still theoretically recognizing, just as still theoretically the king is head of the United Kingdom, recognizing the authority of the king, even though some of them are republics, some of them, you know, are commonwealths themselves, etc., as a way of creating cooperation among those states and continuing sort of culturals. They have Commonwealth Games that they have. It was in London this past summer. Yeah. I believe it was in London. I could be wrong. As a way of, you know, keeping cooperation going, keeping the cultural connections going, trade, etc. So they're sort of, like I say, the unofficial ambassadors.
Okay.
Unofficial, official ambassadors.
Sure, official, yeah, unofficial. Now here again, we're seeing more video of the now King Charles and just the huge crowd out to greet him. A moment before that, you saw Camilla, his consort, I suppose, getting out of the vehicle with. I get confused sometimes on just how these roles work, and you know, does her position change? You know, as
To some degree, yes. She'll have a higher profile than she did as as the wife of the heir to the throne. She has a higher position or higher profile position as the wife of the holder of the throne.
Right.
But as with Charles's father was called Prince Philip because his mom was the queen. So the went through the bloodline. So she will not become, I don't believe, queen, but will have some other title, and I don't keep up with those quite so closely, reflecting that she is the wife of the person holding the throne.
Okay, so that's basically essentially it then. Yeah, she'll remain with him, obviously, but will not become queen or be called queen.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. I guess that just transitions, as I said, to the fascination with the royal family in this country. And we were talking before the show about why you think maybe that's the case to some degree. Sometimes I wonder, watching the crowds there, and it was sure huge with Queen Elizabeth's funeral, but that the attention in this country was even greater. I mean, it was the lead in all the newscasts, the nightly newscast. We followed it. I mean, I think it's as big here as it is there almost, the fascination of it. And I'd be curious to hear why some folks are so fascinated in this country. But why do you think this is? And again, we've got some of the funeral video that, as I said, played on the lead of every network newscast, when this happened. What is it about the royal family in this country that captivates so many people?
It does seem odd, given that we fought a war to get away from them, that we are then so fascinated and loving of them. Alexis de Tocqueville, in trying to explain democracy in America in a book oddly called Democracy in America, talked about how democracies often there's no place for an aristocracy in democracy, but you need some things that perform some of the functions of an aristocracy. And part of that is people setting a good example in public, much like, again, what we just talked about.
And you don't think you can get that necessarily, as we've seen always from our political figures. You need someone specifically in that role that knows their job is to behave.
Well, it's hard to do it if you're going to also be a political figure.
Right.
It's hard to be political and apolitical at the same time, right? That's part of why the Queen was so careful to remain apolitical, because it would have undermined what she could do as an example.
Yep.
And so we do treat our president as both the person in charge of government, although Congress technically does more of that, but also as the figurehead for the country. And it puts presidents sometimes in difficult positions when they will need to speak for their party versus when they need to speak for the whole country.
Right. Clearly.
So,
yeah, right.
So that sort of public example function we've let devolve to sometimes politicians, or tried to. Certainly George Washington would come to mind in that regard. But mainly celebrities, and you get a mixed bag there.
Yeah, okay. You think the substitute for royals, if you will, to some degree in this country, are people maybe famous in the entertainment industry, I don't know, sports, athletes, or the like. And but they don't have official roles in that capacity. No. And it's interesting when you say that. I mean, you're right. In this country, you have a president who obviously is going to have, and sort of evenly split almost in this country in people's opinions, half the country hating him and half the country loving him. Sometimes is the way it plays out, no matter who the president is. That's tough. In Britain, the royals are pretty much, I don't know, is it fair to say they're almost universally loved because they're not taking stances that are going to upset people? And I'm sure they have their opinions behind closed doors, but they don't vote, you said, right?
Correct.
They don't even vote.
The Queen is not allowed to vote.
Right.
Just as she's not subject to a lot of the laws because she's Queen, she's also, because she's King now. Because the King was, he's not subject to a lot of the laws because he's the monarch, but he's also then not a subject and therefore not entitled to vote.
Okay.
What was the question right before that?
Well, I guess I was talking about how, the idea of let me get my train of thought on this. In this country, we have athletes and we have actors that take this role, and the fact that they don't, well, some of them get political, but in this country we have a president who has both sides hammering him. There, the Queen doesn't get, or the King will not get political, so are they universally loved?
I wouldn't say that.
You wouldn't. Okay.
No.
Now,
and what they usually go for instead of love would be respect, because you're not going to ever be universally loved, right?
What do you think the objections are to them?
Well, so there are people who are what we say Republicans, little r, because the republic, in this case, being a form of government where you don't have a monarch. So you think about, for example, Germany. It's the Federal Republic of Germany, and accurately named. A lot of times the names don't actually reflect the circumstances. It is a federation. They used to have an emperor, Kaiser. They replaced that person in the political system with a president. That's what we did when we seceded from Great Britain. When we left them, we replaced the sovereign, the head executive, with a president who's elected. as opposed to keeping. So like, for example, the Netherlands still has a constitutional monarchy. They still have a, Sweden is still a constitutional monarchy. The United Kingdom is a constitutional monarchy where they still have a monarch. All of them have become basically those figureheads who sort of serve to help rally public opinion and lead the public, morally. Germany's president does basically the same thing. The chancellor, the equivalent of the prime minister, has most of the political power in Germany, but they have a president who basically doesn't have a lot of political power, but is there to function as the conscience of the nation. And many of them have done an excellent job of that, of giving speeches. For example, I keep hearing these, people are talking about this. Well, we've done that before, and you remember how that worked out for us, and it wasn't good. So maybe we need to remember these things, or not forget this, or and that's the role the royals play in Great Britain. So what they need for that to work is to be respected, honest. They need to be fair, brokers, right? Sort of that you can. And I think it's not a long trip from respect to love. But respect is the important part. And so for people who are little r Republicans, not political party, but just they would argue that, well, we don't need the expense, we don't need the added show. Let's not be a constitutional monarchy, just let them be private citizens. And then if we need a president, we can elect a president. Like Canada, for example, when they left the United Kingdom or the British Empire, they have a governor general who theoretically represents the monarch and is basically more of a figurehead, whereas the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is the one who runs the government day to day and does most things, but there's still someone there who serves that figurehead role in place of the monarch, and actually still technically in place of the monarch.
And again, that's interesting. So you have countries that have that. This country, the United States, does not really. It's the president kind of takes on that role, but if not, it's unofficial, as you said. Maybe we'll think about that. What's the closest we can get to a monarchy in this country? And I hope it's not the Kardashians. We'll take a break. We'll be back as we continue our discussion with Nathan Grifffith, professor at Belmont, on the royals and the transition, the changes ahead now that we have King Charles. We'll be right back.